Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'm Akarsh, and I'll be presenting our work on automating the search for artificial life with foundation models. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this amazing conference. And I really wanted to come in person and meet all of you, but unfortunately, the circumstances didn't allow it. But I'm still excited to be here virtually. Okay, sweet. Let's get started. So yeah, my journey into A life. So I think my journey into A life really started when I was a kid, and I guess as most people, as most kids from like the 2000s era, I grew up playing Minecraft. And as most of you probably already know, it's like this open-ended game that simulates the real world in like a very rough sense, right? A very rough sense. And you can chop wood, you can like carry pickaxes, you can explore the world, and you can really create whatever you want. But the thing that really appealed to me for the longest time was the fact that it was like a simulation of our real world, and in that it was simulating all of the physics of our real world. And just like a lot of people trying to understand like our confusing existence in this weird world, I fell in love with using like physics and physics simulators like Minecraft as a guide to understanding our universe. And I created all sorts of like these weird dynamical system physics simulations as a kid. And for the longest time, even in college, I would plan to major in and study physics. However, I remember like a distinct moment or a distinct event that really sparked my interest into evolution. And specifically, I remember watching this video from a famous YouTuber named Seth Bling. And you probably might have seen this video since it has like 10 million views. And in this video, he basically evolved small neural networks to play the game of Mario. And he used Ken Stanley's neuroevolution of augmenting topologies, or NEAT, to basically evolve the graphs of like the interconnected neurons to process the games. And you can see on the right image over here, it's like these weird random graphs, very exotic looking graphs, and they're pretty arbitrary, but they end up like processing the game frames in a way that allows the Mario creature to just finish the game. And I remember being completely mind blown. I mean, the I didn't realize you could do like evolution in a computer, right? I thought evolution was just something you read about in biology textbooks, and that's just how we came about. But I didn't know you could actually simulate something like that in a computer. And to me, it seemed like, and it still seems like, we're literally simulating the process that created us humans, which is absolutely crazy to me still. And that's like the coolest thing in the world. And I don't know who wouldn't agree with that, right? So after this, I started reading a lot of papers on genetic algorithms, and I really started digging deep into it. And I really like this idea of self-adaptation, especially like the idea that genetic algorithms can mutate and adapt themselves, like their own mutation rates, their own crossover functions. But I found a lot of this work didn't really work well in practice. And eventually, after a while, I came up with an idea to fix it based on group selection, just like an intuition I had. And I reached out to one of the authors of NEAT, Risto Mikulainen, because I was at UT Austin and he was also at UT Austin. And we ended up getting a paper out of it somehow. So this really like sparked my interest into like, more the generic algorithms. But this was still like a very like shallow way of looking at artificial life. I just saw it like an optimization process, right? So after a while, I started my PhD and I tr switched over to more the AI side of things. Because obviously, if you're just going to optimize things, then you should just train bigger and larger neural networks with SGD. But I was really interested in RL research because it was more embodied. And one thing that kept popping up for me and that I kept noticing is in our lab and all the other work in AI, all the AIs that we're creating, they learn from human data, right? They learn from the internet. They learn from natural language. They learn from human annotated images. And this is kind of crazy because it's just copying another intelligent being's artifacts into its own brain. It's not really it's not really like emergent in the sense that it's creating it from scratch, right? So it's just copying another intelligent being's artifacts, right? And even RL agents, usually they're learning from like a very hard-coded, human-coded environments, right? Instead of specifying the data, you're just hard-coding a complex environment from which these AIs can learn from. And if you think about it, natural evolution didn't need any of these. It didn't need the internet. it didn't need anything to any humans or any other. Hopefully, it didn't need alien life to like get us started, right? And it just created all of these from only the laws of physics. You just run the laws of physics for like 4 billion years, and you end up with all this diversity of life, right? So I really became obsessed and I really want to start understanding these emergent processes like evolution, like self-play, like artificial life, open-endedness, all the cool stuff that you guys are super familiar with, right? And I want to point out these two works really influenced like the research directions I took. It's like the first one, I'm sure you guys know both of these. The first one is like both of these are from Ken Joel, and then the second one is from Lisa Soros also. The first one is obviously the why greatness cannot be planned, the myth of the objective. It really inspired me to just chase. It argues that you should like follow your own research interests. In terms of research, you just follow your interests, and that's a general thing, good thing to do in life as well. And the second one is a more technical article about how open-endedness is like a grand challenge on the likes of like the other grand challenges in math and physics, and we should be treating it as such, like creating an open-ended system. So bouncing off of that idea, I want to paint the picture that they painted for me, and I want to share it with you. So the cool thing, if you think about it, all of the diversity of life that we see here on Earth was produced by basically, you could call it a single run of a single algorithm, right? And this is an open-ended algorithm that we call natural evolution. And it produced everything from like fish and snakes to giraffes and colorful peacocks, and also produced like a human brain, right? And we call processes like these open-ended because they have really don't have an end goal in mind. They continuously diverge and innovate and produce novelty seemingly forever. One example of this is that if you come back to Earth 1 billion years from now, you probably will have a completely different set of animals, a completely different ecosystem, and humans may or may not even be here, right? So yeah, I mean that's like it's super beautiful picture. And I really got into artificial life because it's trying to recreate this beautiful picture, right? It's trying to understand and recreate this amazing process. So yeah, and the cool thing about artificial life to me is that it's not only trying to create life as we know it, which is already ambitious enough, but it's trying to create life as it could be in alien worlds, in program worlds, in synthetic worlds that you can't even imagine, right? So that's the reason I fell in love with it. So I'm gonna go over a couple of examples of artificial life just to showcase a lot of cool of works that inspired me, but also to set up the background before I start diving into my work. It's going to be relevant because I'm going to point out some of the flaws in these existing systems. So I'm sure you guys already know this stuff, but yeah, Conway's Game of Life, very seminal work. There's like a 2D grid of dead and alive cells, and it's super simple rules. It's just a dead cell with three living neighbors comes alive, a live cell with two or three living neighbors survives, everything else dies. Just three simple rules, basically. And from this, you get really complex emergent outcomes that are possible. Here's like a glider gun that's producing these basically bullets that go on till infinity. And yeah, people have made everything from like spaceships. People have even made like spaceships that create glider guns, like as a trail that they leave behind. And it's like insanely, it feels very open-ended that you can like kind of create anything you want in this world, right? And Game of Life is Turing complete as well, which means that it can simulate it can simulate the game of life within the game of life itself. So if I keep running this a little bit, someone made it an initial state that such that at a high level, it's simulating game of life at an outer loop. It's a very meta thing, right? And this means that it's Turing complete. It can simulate anything that a normal computer can simulate as well. Cool. And then one property I want to point out about Game of Life that I find very cool and that a lot of these simulations share is this idea that they're not predictable what they're going to do. In that that's how it's very related to the ideas of emergence. But I have a thought experiment for you guys. So I took one initial state on the left side. I took the same initial state, but I just changed the first 3 pixels on the top left on the top left of the simulation, and I'm plotting their difference on the right. If you run this simulation, you find that the error propagates and that the simulation is extremely chaotic. So you can see that just by changing 3 pixels in the initial state, the left simulation kind of dies out pretty quickly, but the middle simulation, it kind of just keeps going and being somewhat, you could say, open-ended for way, way longer, just by changing 3 pixels. So so these simulations are very chaotic, and because they're Turing complete, they're undecidable. And Stephen Wolfram has this notion of like computational irreducibility that I really like, which is the idea that you can't really short circuit these simulations into like closed form solutions. And this is going to tie into how we design our method later. Here are some other examples of super simple, like computationally irreducible systems. So on the left is the three-body simulation, which is just simulating three gravitational bodies in a super simple simulation with super simple rules. But no one can, it's a proven actually, you can't write a closed form mathematical solution for where these balls will be an hour later. You just have to do the simulation, right? And the same thing for the double pendulum, which is just a pendulum stacked on top of another pendulum. You can't predict what it's going to do. And you can see its behavior looks very, very random, right? So basically the point is even super simple systems exhibit these properties. So if we create more complex systems, they're surely going to demonstrate these properties, right? And another work that really inspired me was Carl Sims' Evolved Virtual Creatures. In this one, he literally evolved these block creatures to do 3D block creatures to do whatever he wanted. And specifically, the cool thing about this work is that the way that he parameterized the morphologies or the bodies of the robot was using these graphs over here. So you can see the leg segment node, it connects back to itself and it specifies that during the developmental process, it should basically create a leg segment from the previous leg segment. And it uses these rules and you can basically encode like a pretty diverse range of morphologies and it's pretty expressive encoding. And it's kind of like DNA because it has a lot of reuse. You only specify this rule once and it gets used like almost 6 times in this body in order to create the morphology. And he trained controllers, like neural network controllers, within these morphologies in order to control the muscles to solve specific tasks like swimming in the water, chasing like a light source, or like walking on terrain and stuff. So this was like from the 1990s, and this I think this is one of the coolest pieces of work, even though it's so old. Another cool work I'm sure you guys have seen is this alien project where they literally tried to simulate this very large particle system and then the particles like can connect to each other via springs and stuff. And yeah, it literally looks like you're looking in underneath a microscope at like an alien world, like right? It literally looks like an alien cell universe. Yeah, so there's a lot of other simulations which I'm not talking about here. I think Ivan presented a couple of days ago on his computational life where they're trying to get life to emerge and successfully get life to emerge in these exotic program worlds, like with self-replicating programs and stuff, which is a very, very alien thing to us humans, right? When we're carbon-based life forms. And Bert, I think, also presented on his awesome Linea work, which is like a continuous cellular automata. And my collaborator, Chris, he made Jack's Life, which is like a more like a multi-agent evolutionary simulation that can like where the agents can change the terrains and stuff. But there's many, many other simulations I can talk about. But yeah, but let's dive into our project. So the great thing about this is all super great, right? But if you think about it, most of these simulations were hand designed by humans to get interesting behaviors. And that's already super cool. But the problem is that as A-Life simulations get more complex and we want to create a more and more intricate simulations, do we really want to keep tediously hand designing all of the simulations rules and parameters and low-level details? And I have a thought experiment for you guys. Imagine trying to hand design the periodic table and say our universe and like the pairwise interactions between all the elements in order to get life to emerge. You would literally need to specify how like carbon should interact with hydrogen and how it should interact with oxygen in order to get molecules to form, in order to get cells to form, in order to get those cells to create animals, in order to get those animals to create evolutionary arms races between each other. That's like an insanely hard task. And if you change one thing in the periodic table, like let's say you don't let oxygen bind to hydrogen, then you don't get water. So it's like this very weird, intricate search space where you don't really know what the right decisions are, right? And I wouldn't want to do this task personally by myself. And moreover, if the simulations we're designing are truly emergent and open-ended and computationally reducible, as we saw, which it surely probably will be, then by definition, you can't really rely on rules or intuition to design the rules, right? Because by definition, emergent means it's creating something that's somewhat subjectively unexpected, right? That's the way I think about emergence and open-endedness. So if that's the case, there's like basically a fundamental flaw in how we're designing the system. So we can't rely on our intuitions to design these systems. So it seems obvious that we need some sort of automated simulation design, right? So one thing we could do is just try to search for simulations that have good properties or are interesting in some way to us humans. So in that case, you need an objective to search over or to at least quantify what you're looking for in some sense, right? So one option we have is to like mathematize interestingness, open-endedness, and emergence. And people have certainly done this kind of stuff. People have came up with ideas of like sophistication from information theory. There's this idea of like assembly theory from like biochemistry, which tries to measure like how evolved something is. And you can definitely try to mathematize interestingness. But the problem is a lot of our definitions for interestingness are very, very hard to capture with simple equations. Every time someone thinks, oh, I nailed it, I figured out this is the equation that gives me everything I want, right? It turns out if you like optimize for it, you get exactly what something that satisfies the equation, but it isn't really that appealing to a human because a human's intuition of interestingness is so much more than just that any single equation that someone can come up with. And I do think that a lot of these things that we're looking for, like open-endedness and emergence in general, is subjective as in the eyes of the beholder. So that makes it even more complicated to design the right types of equations, right? So we stick with another option, option two, which is just ask a foundation model. So this might seem super naive at first, right? It's like, why would you just ask an LLM, right? But there's a lot of evidence that as you scale up AI systems, you there are deep representations that these neural networks learn, and the way that they see the world more and more resembles how humans see and process the world. And here's a paper from my advisor, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Deep Features as a Perceptual Metric, which basically showed that like deep networks are a good that you can use them to predict what a human would say about certain images, right? So we're going to go along this line and see how far we can push this direction of reasoning. And with that, I want to introduce our work, ASIL, the Automated Search for Artificial Life, right? And this is a high-level picture of what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to dive into these in a lot of detail in the next few slides, but this is the high level. So basically on the left, you can see that we're going to be taking a simulation configuration, running the simulation, getting a sequence of images or the video, feeding it into some sort of vision language model, and extracting a score based on what we want to search over, and using this score to do a search for the right simulation configuration which satisfies that criteria, right? And basically, this is the overall system of ASIL, and you can use it in one of three ways. The first way you could use it is to search for a specific simulation which matches a natural language description of what you want. So over here, we have found a linear simulation which looks like a biological cell under the microscope. In the second one, way to use it, you can use it to try and search for open-ended simulations. And by that, I mean try to find the rules of a simulation which produce novelty in time for as long as possible. And we're going to talk about this in more detail also. And the last thing you can do is try to do some illumination. And what I mean by illumination is you want to basically have this like weird universe of artificial stuff. You just want to find all the diverse things that are possible. So basically, you're trying to search for life as it could be and all the different ways that it could be in a specific simulation. So we did this in linear and Boyd's and particle life as well. And if the videos in this presentation show up choppy, I encourage you to check out our blog post and our web paper. They are really smooth, nice videos. Oh, nice. Yeah. I noticed on Zoom it gets better over time for some reason. Okay, so let's start by reformulating the problem. So instead of thinking about this as designing a single simulation, I wanted to change the way like the way you think about like designing simulations, right? So I tried to come up with this more generic view, which is like instead of designing a single simulation, let's just define a more generic set of simulations, which I call S, right? Set of simulations, and you can see this is how I depict S. And often this is much, much, much easier to do than designing a specific simulation. I'll tell you why here in a bit. So once you have this set of simulations, you can use theta to parameterize this large set. And basically theta will parameterize the initial state distribution, the dynamics rule, which is step, and the render or and optionally the rendering rule if you need that. You don't really need to do this, but in a lot of circumstances, like with specific types of simulations, you may need to, you don't know how to render a specific state. But the reason that this parameterizing this more generic set of simulations is easier than parameterizing than describing a single simulation is because you don't need to make any arbitrary rules. Like let's say you come up with like this giant evolutionary simulation and you have a hyperparameter, how fast should the grass grow? And should it be set to like one or two? Like I don't know. It's super arbitrary, and that could make the breaking difference between if it's open ended or not, right? So instead of just deciding and just creating a simulation, just search for the more general set of simulation. Just describe the whole set of things you want to search over, and just search over it automatically, right? And this applies to not only random parameters like control that, but all you can search over very, very general dynamics rules where you don't even know how the two components interact with each other. Like how does hydrogen interact with helium? I don't know, but I'm just going to specify the generic way that all elements can react and just search over the specific details later. So it's often much easier. Okay, great. So let's dive into the first way to use ASIL, which is this supervised target. And what we're going to be doing is trying to find a single simulation specified via natural language. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our theta, our simulation theta. Let's say we are given a specific instantiation of a single simulation. We can define we can define this function RS, which samples an initial state, steps it using the dynamics function for t time steps, and then renders it as an image, right? And from this, so first things, I'm going to be presenting the work in the mathematical sense on with a mathematical equation on the left side and a more pictorial depiction of what I'm talking about on the right side. And I find the picture much more intuitive to me. So but I'll talk about both of them. So once you have this space of simulations, we just define this as a search problem. So we are trying to argmax, which is this red path over a red path on the right here, to find the simulation, as in the find the theta, such that whenever you run this simulation using this RS function and you run it in time and you get a sequence of images, then it should when first of all, let's talk about the what happens next. So you have each of these sequence of frames. You can take each of these sequence of frames, each frame in the sequence, and embed it using a vision language model into the foundation model's representation space. So in practice, what this means is you take each image and you just transform it into a vector using the AI foundation model. So if you do this, you end up with basically a trajectory in latent space. And you can see it goes from S naught, which is the initial state, to ST, which is the final state. Once you have this trajectory in latent space, you can do a lot of cool things. The first thing you can do is here. You can try to pull this trajectory to be closer to a predefined trajectory that you specified via natural language. So mathematically, what this means is that you're literally trying to score the trajectory based on how close it is in the foundation model's representation space to a predefined point, which is defined by a prompt that you also embedded using some sort of language model, right? So on the right, you can see that we're basically trying to pull this trajectory to be in order for it to go through the points a cell and then two cells and then an ecosystem. And you can imagine that if the trajectory correctly goes through these 3 points, and the simulation is like constrained enough, it has to be doing self-replication, right? That's the only way to satisfy this temporal objective of going from like one cell to two cells, I mean, you have to somewhat do like you have to create another cell, right? If the foundation model were perfect and our search algorithm were perfect, that's the only way to um, do this problem, right? To satisfy this objective. Yeah. Mm. We have many different experiments. For most of them, we only do a single prompt, but we do have a neural cellular automata experiment. By the way, for the single prompt, it kind of depends. Some of them are like 256 time steps, and one of them is like 1,000 time steps. It's like variable, but I'm about to show you some more details in the next slides. And for neural cellular automata, we did a few experiments where we did multiple prompts in temporal horizon, like the one shown here. I'm about to talk about the time steps in the next few slides. Any other questions before I move on to the results? So actually, before the results, we need to talk about some more details about our equation. So we have this nice mathematical equation to figure out what we're doing. But first of all, the VLM model, right? The image model and the text model. What are we actually going to use for those? We're going to be using CLIP. CLIP is basically a foundation model trained by OpenAI, which aligns the representation spaces of text and images. So it's basically trained to match the image of a dog to the text, a dog. And the same thing with a cat, a cell, a bacteria, everything on the internet, right? It's trained on the entirety of the internet. And it literally gives you a image encoder, which is a vision transformer, and a text encoder, which is a language transformer, and it spits out a vector of 512 size, right? That's what we're going to be using. And then the second thing we're going to have to talk about is this argmax, which is this generic optimization framework, right? You can use any optimization you want that fits your needs, and we try it out with like four different optimization algorithms, I think. But for most of the experiments I'll be talking about in the next slide is we're going to use CMES. Specifically, we're going to use like a linearly separable variant of CMES. But it's the basic idea, if you don't know how it works, is that it's just doing black box hill climbing. So instead of having a gradient that you follow, you just have a big population of solutions that you keep track of, and you see, and they explore. Some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad, and you try to basically hill climb towards the ones that work better. And eventually, you zero in on a simulation in your giant set of simulations. So it's just an optimization algorithm. We use gradient descent for neural cellular automata, but for most simulations, they're not differentiable at all. I can get into this in the next slide. So first of all, I'll talk about that in like the next few slides. Also, they're not differentiable in the slightest. But here's the high level results, and we're gonna go through these step by step. But yeah, these are the results, and it turns out that this method actually works really well. You can search for Boyd's creatures that give you like an emergent shape or pattern. You can search for linear creatures which look like a caterpillar or like a self-replicating pattern or like a pizza or something. And it works in like a lot of diverse settings like linear, Boyd's, particle life. Honestly, most simulation substrates that we tried this out, it kind of just worked out of the box, which is really surprising. So let's talk about linear first, I guess. So I'm sure you all already heard about linear from Bird, but I'll give you a quick TLDR is that it generalizes Conway's game of life to continuous values. So it's like a continuous valued cellular automata. It's like a giant grid, but each one can take on multiple values, and there's like three channels. And the cool thing is that each of the cells use like the same local differential equation update rule. And what we're doing is basically just searching over the initial state and the dynamics patterns in order to satisfy the objective, right? And this is what the results look like. So any questions here? Yeah, lineage is differentiable, but in this case, we also use CMES. And the reason still use CMES is because like it's for these three things, it's at least it's just I mean it's because like the Boyd's and particle life weren't differentiable, so it's a much more general thing, right? And moreover, even if they were differentiable, I think that the gradients in these complex search spaces don't really mean much. Because if you think about like the Boyd's simulation, or not in Boyd's, but in general, if you have like a very complex system, small changes to the search, like in the search space, in the parameter space, can really give you very, very wild changes to the behavior, right? And if that's true, then gradient descent is just not going to be good at searching over this, because it is gradient descent really assumes like a locally smooth surface, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. A CMES in practice, you end up relying on like locally smooth like curvature and stuff. That's why I still think we need a lot of work on when we get more and more complex simulations. I do think we're gonna have to replace CMES with something else. Yeah, I agree. I can talk more about that at the end of the presentation on some ideas I've been thinking about along those lines. But okay, so in Boyd's, we're basically simulating like these 128 like bird-like objects which move in like 2D space, right? And each of these Boyd's, they only see like their local neighbors, and they decide if I should steer left or right. It's kind of like a birds in like 3D space. They only see their neighbors, and they're deciding how to fly based on only the neighbors, right? And so each time step, they're just deciding left, right, and that's all the decisions that they make. And importantly, all the voids share the exact same neural network that makes this decision rule. So basically, it is they have the exact same decision rule, and they're the same thing, but it's just replicated across space. And if you do this at a larger scale, you can get some emergent phenomena, right? And our goal is just going to be to search for the neural network parameters. That is our substrate in order to get more emergent phenomena to come out of this. And you can see this is an interesting failure case. It doesn't really create a Fibonacci spiral, but it does create a spiral, like this cool spiral thing nonetheless, right? And this one is also super surprising to me. I was like, what would happen if you just prompted this to create a biological cell? And it literally created something that kind of resembles a cell. And I don't think a human could have ever designed something like this, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I was only looking at the final frame, and it was just like 1,000 simula steps of simulating. And as you look at the final frame, and you optimize the parameters based on that. Yeah, every one of these where it's just a single prompt, I just took the last frame. So here's particle life. Particle life is super cool. It simulates like 1,000 particles in like 2D space, and importantly, there's like 6 different types of particles, and these are depicted by the colors. And the particle color basically determines the interaction behavior with other particles. So a red and a green particle might attract, and a green and a yellow particle might repel. And they're basically just like this 6 by 6 interaction matrix, which specifies what repels what attracts what, right? And we just search over this 6 by 6 interaction matrix, which dictate the dynamics rule in order to get certain things to come out of it. So you can see we found like concentric circles, a caterpillar again, a red organism, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, this is also very non-differentiable, right? I don't even, you can't get a gradient. And even if you did, I have a feeling that small changes, maybe not in this one still, but in general, small changes can really take you a long distance. So, okay, cool. And then here's an example. All of those were with single prompt, right? Just taking the final state and taking a single prompt. Here's an example of taking 2 prompts. So over here we have like one biological cell, that's the first prompt, and then 2 biological cells. And our goal is to basically go from a state which has this in order to a state which has that. And we use neurocellular automata to do this. So, we just optimized this, right, with gradient descent and backprop through time. So this is a more continuous training setting because I think from the original paper, it really works well, right? So we just optimized on the top. You can see it goes from 1 cell to 2 cells. So it is kind of doing like a very naive form of self-replication in this sense. And then we just saw if it generalized to multiple states, and obviously it will because it's like a very constrained neural cellular automata, right? Okay, cool. Any other questions in this? Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And I flipped things around in this slide deck to maybe this might explain it better because I think illumination is more might be more related to the supervised target. So let's talk about illumination. So in this case, we're going to be trying to use the VLM to find a diverse set of simulations rather than just finding a single simulation that we cared about. Because in the previous one, we're really just searching for a single thing that we cared about, right? So we have our same function, which is rs, which samples initial state, steps it t times, and renders it. But now what we're going to do is basically try to search for a set of simulations such that a certain criteria holds. So what we're going to do is, again, take our simulation, run this. We're going to take each of these simulations in our set, run them in parallel. So run all the simulations in time. And now we have a sequence of frames again. We're going to embed these frames from the sequence into the foundation model latent space, right? And now we have a set of trajectories in the foundation model's latent space, right? Then all we're going to do is try to basically push these trajectories apart. So mathematically, we're basically formalizing this as trying to find a set of trajectories such that every point in the every individual in that set, its nearest neighbor is far away. That's how we score the set of simulations to be further, right? And in the pictorial diagram, you can just think about these as you have a set of trajectories and they're just pushing each other apart and they're repelling. So you want to find a set in this, you want to find a set in this original space that's far apart in this foundation model space. That's what we're doing at the end of the day. And in practice, what the way we actually achieve that is just with a super naive genetic algorithm. We just have like a population, we have like a small number that we like a batch size of simulations that we take, and we mutate it, and we only keep the original population size of solutions that are the most diverse in a sense. Or we, I guess we imagine you have like 1,000 simulations and you sample 32 and you mutate them, and now you have 1,000 plus 32 simulations, and you just kill off the 32 least novel or diverse solutions, and that's your genetic algorithm. And this turns out it's optimizing this objective that we formalized, right? Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, we just use the full dimensionality. And the reason it works is because it's clip space and it's pre-trained on the internet. Because if you just take like a random, um, maybe autoencoder or like, maybe not autoencoder, but like if you just take like a random projection into this large space, right? Most vectors, if in this space, are just orthogonal. Even just randomly sampling vectors in this five dimensional space, there's like a 99.9 chance it's going to be like a very, it's going to be orthogonal, right? The reason it works so well is because Clip is trained to not create orthogonal vectors. It's trained to make vectors more aligned for certain types of vectors, like if this image of a cat matches the text description of a cat. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So let's do this in Linea, like you said. So we just did this in Linea, and we just these are a bunch of different creatures that we found, and you can see there's a big diversity in color, shape, and form of these creatures that we found using this illumination search, right? And these are just a few of the creatures we found. Here's like we actually ended up running this for like a population size of like 1,024. So here's all the creatures that we found in one giant image. And we actually have a poster of this on the on our website. You can check it out. But obviously that's not very organized, right? It doesn't really tell you much about Linea. So we wanted to get some more like understanding of like Linea as a specific substrate. So what we did was we took each of these simulations, we took their final states as images and embedded them using clip, obviously, and then took this giant clip space, which is this 512 dimensional clip space, and projected it into only two dimensions using UMAP, which is like a dimensionality reduction um, process. So once we did this, you have this 2D scatter plot of where the simulations landed, right? We just bin them, and we just made a grid and put each simulation into a specific bin and just showcase like a random simulation within that bin. And basically, we call this like the simulation atlas because it's like a nice description of all the simulations that are possible in Linea. It's kind of like a map of how to navigate Linea, I guess. That's why it's an atlas. So you can see there's like the green simulations on the left, the blue ones here, the more cell-like looking simulations in the middle, and a lot of exotic ones on the right as well, and the red ones on the right. And yeah, and there's a larger simulation atlas in the paper you can check out also. So we did the same thing with Boids. We found a large diversity of behaviors in Boids. This kind of seems like just a lot of different behaviors are possible in Boids because most people when they think about Boids, they only think about one thing, which is the flocking, right? From Craig Reynolds, which was super cool. But now we know that there's other things that you can do with Boids. A lot of diverse things you can do with Boids now. I should. That's a good point. I should clarify that. Yeah, it's actually it has way more parameters because the original Boids only had three parameters, right? It's like the yeah, it only had like three mechanisms for how they interact. In this case, we actually generalize that and say each bird is like a neural network that sees its neighbors. So it basically sees its like closest like eight neighbors, and it has like a very small neural network. It's like 200 parameters that like looks at the neighbors and basically just decides whether to go left or right. And this network is like permutation invariant to where the voids are in space, right? But yeah, that's a very good point. It actually generalizes it, so it is actually a bigger space of things. You're right. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I heard you. I didn't follow that last part. So we did do an experiment where we did like a linear interpolation between two simulations, and I'm going to show that later in the slide deck. But I don't understand that question about you have a third simulation in one bin. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Basically, you have like a direction you're traversing down, and you just apply that direction to another simulation within the same first bin, right? Gotcha. That's a good question. Um, I don't think that would work that well. I mean, if you discretize enough, if you discretize this to be like the bins are super small and the simulations are super close, then it would trivially work. But in this specific setup where these specific bins, I really doubt that would work. Because I mean, linear, if you change like the parameters even quite a significant amount, I mean, it's not like a linear, that's like what you're describing is like a very linear operation, sort of. And I really doubt that this is that linear. Yeah. But that's a cool question. But yeah, so we have this. We also did like this large search for Boids, and here's like 1,024 Boyd simulations that we found. You can't really see much in this. So we also wanted to, we also made a simulation atlas in the same way for Boyds, and you can see that its clip is correctly able to semantically identify the different types of Boyd simulations. Over here on the top, we have like the. I'm just gonna pause this really quickly. Maybe right. Oh, I won't let me pause it. But yeah, so over here on the bottom, I guess you can start off with the bottom right. It has a bunch of these snake-looking um, emergent phenomena. In the middle and the bottom left, it has like more circling behavior. On the top, it has this like dense flocking. On the right, it has more sparse flocking. On the left, it's like making like weird little small cell-like things, which are each individual units. So it finds a lot of these unique behaviors that I didn't really think were possible before. And here's a larger simulation atlas of voids. You can't really see much, but okay. So one thing we wanted to do in this illumination setup is just ablate how important the foundation model of representations of space really is, right? So is the foundation model really doing much, or is it just doing something super naive? So what we did was we did our original experiments were with clip. We also tried it out with Dino 2, which is another foundation model trained on only images. And in this case, we're only doing image-image similarity, right? We're not really doing anything with text, so that's fine. And the last thing we did is we just use a naive pixel level representation. This is to showcase that like pixel level and low level metrics don't really work that well. If you use some sort of autoencoder, I think this would also work for these specific simulations, but there are also reasons I still think you should use foundation models, which I'll talk about. So you can see that the clip and Dino really capture what it means to be for two images to be different, and it matches a human's description. But if you just do this in pixel space, it's definitely different in pixel space, but it looks the same to a human, right? You would consider all these simulations about the same, right? So pixel space does not work definitely. And okay, let me talk about the autoencoding space for a little bit because I think there's a lot of works that, which super cool works that work with autoencoders, right? And I definitely think that they would work for Linea and Boyd's probably as well. Maybe Boyd's, I think. But the thing is, I really think foundation models are better because they're much more likely to have human priors baked into them than autoencoders, which are like overfit to a specific domain. Because you can imagine that if your autoencoder is overfit to Boyd's, it cares about reconstructing each individual Boyd specifically, and that's its objective. But maybe a human wouldn't necessarily care about that. Humans care about all sorts of semantic information and high level information, not like just low level information. And Clip is really trained to capture this high level semantic meaning and not the low level details of specific pixels, right? In that way, it's Clip is closer to I guess autoencoders are closer to this pixel representation. They're definitely different. They're definitely much deeper representations, which are really good, but they are closer to pixel representations in that sense. Yeah. Hmm. Mm. Oh, that is a very cool idea. Yeah, there's a lot of work in I think natural language processing where it's called like an inversion. It's like you're trying to find the text which matches a vector that you already know about. It's like text inversion, and they do the same thing in images with image inversion. We didn't do that, but you could definitely do that. You could apply any standard text inversion method in order to find text which matches this prompt. I'm not, I doubt it would work that well because this is so out of distribution to Clip. So in some sense, like Clip thinks all these simulations are kind of the same because to Clip, it's seen like dogs and cats. So all of these are just Boyd simulations to it, right? It can barely tell these apart. It can tell them apart, but not to the extent where I doubt it could tell apart to the extent in which it could capture it via text. But that'd be very cool to try. Okay, cool. Okay, and then let's dive into our last one. So we're going to be trying to search for open-ended simulations, right? And we have the same exact setting. We have this RS function. And what we're going to do is we're going to search for this space of simulation, search through this space of simulations to find a single simulation such that when you run it, it creates a sequence of frames. You embed these frames using the foundation model into a latent space, as we talked about before, And now you have a trajectory in latent space, right? But here, what we're going to do is instead of guiding this towards a specific prompt that we want, what we're going to do is we're just going to push this trajectory in such a way that any given point on this trajectory, we're going to push it from its nearest historical neighbor. So mathematically, we're basically scoring a trajectory as good if it winds out and diverges rather than like circles back in. And this is captured by this historical nearest neighbor idea. So pictorially, it kind of just looks like you're taking each of these points along the trajectory and you're just pushing it away from this previous historical points, right? So just imagine it just trying to create divergent trajectories. And this is what it kind of means to be novel in this latent space. So people have been like, trying to quantify and think about open-endedness for a very long time in artificial life, right? And they've come up with all sorts of different metrics. I do think that there is a very subjective notion to open-endedness, as in, I think it's in the eyes of the beholder. And so I think that this foundation model idea, in a good way, in a nice way, it outsources that intuition to a foundation model. So the foundation model is the observer. It is the subjective thing doing the observing. So if you change your latent space, what is open-ended might change. If you have a different foundation model, it might think different things are open-ended. So it captures this notion of subjectivity because you're in this abstract latent space. And moreover, I think I'm starting to believe that novelty should capture everything we really want in open-endedness because whatever your metric for open-endedness, you can construct a latent space such that novelty is what you want, right? Because it's such a abstract notion. This latent space is such an abstract notion that it can basically be anything. So yeah, that's and foundation models are just a good specific latent space that we can use. Mm. Oh, that's super cool. I think I did try out average metric. Yeah, I did try out the average and I found that max worked better. Um yeah, I that's a very good question. I'm pretty sure I tried out the average one because I think we talked about this in the paper as well. Because we tried out like I think two or three different ones and we just chose max because it just empirically worked the best. Okay, so yeah, let's see the results. So this at the top is just Conway's Game of Life, right? So okay, so what are we searching over? Let's talk about that first. So in the Game of Life, there's like three rules. It's like the B3 S23, right? That's like the way to describe the three rules that we talked about in Game of Life. It turns out that there's actually like 260,000 possible simulations you can construct based on toggling each rule on and off. I think there's like 18 rules and 2 to the power 18, you can toggle them on or off. It's like 260,000 around, right? So we just searched over all of them using brute force. We just searched over all the possible rules. For each rule, we searched over 512 initial states. So it was this giant just experiment that we just did where we just searched over all the possible rules, all the possible initial states, and just to saw what happened, right? And this is Conway's Game of Life at the top. So one thing we could do is measure novelty in the way that we just described it, but our latent space is actually just pixel space, right? That's one way to be open-ended. It's just open-endedness in pixel space. That's your observer, pixels. And we found that this simulation with this very complex rule set is the most open-ended. And to us, it just looks like TV jitter, right? It doesn't really look like anything. So what happens whenever you actually use clip as the foundation model? You end up with much more semantically like much more novelty according to what a human would say, right? So you can see some of the simulations here. You can see like this cool one is like it's like kind of looks like train tracks being built and removed and built and removed. And this one I found is actually really open-ended. You could run this for like 50,000 or 100,000 time steps and it just keeps on going. It doesn't plateau. Even the Game of Life from an initial starting point, it always plateaus basically. Um, for a random initial state at least. Yes, exactly. We only searched over the dynamics rule and we fixed the initial state to be a random uniform distribution. Yeah. Another experiment here is with with this one. This rule created like a flower oscillator thing, which like oscillates back and forth, and it creates like new and different types of flowers, as you can see, which is kind of cool. Yeah, and then there's more here that you can see. It would be very cool to search over the initial states of these game of life simulations as well. And I tried some preliminary experiments along this line, and it didn't work out well. It turns out it's like very chaotic because if you have like let's say you have like this nice pattern as your initial state, right? And you toggle one pixel, it might completely change how open-ended it is. I mean, I showed you guys in the beginning of my slide deck, right? You have initial state, you change one thing, and it changes like the entire nature if it's open-ended or not. So you can't really do search in that complex search space. Mhm. Oh, it's yeah, these are the top four. Yeah. It's the green one. Okay, nice. And so here's the visualization of the top three. So in this simulation, we had the Conway's Game of Life, which is blue, the open-ended and pixel space, which is red, and then the foundation model, which is green. So blue, red, green. We take these simulations, blue, red, green, and we just plot their trajectories, their clip trajectories. In our mental diagram, we had this latent trajectory, and we just plot the latent trajectories using the for like random like two vectors in the clip space, right? And you can see that this properly captured the intuition that the red one is just spiraling in and it's just circling in on itself and it's not very open-ended. The blue one is pretty open-ended. It's Conway's Game of Life, so it's like pretty good, but eventually plateaus. And the green one just keeps diverging and generating more and more novelty, and it's much more diverse. Yeah, that's a super cool idea. That would probably, yeah, you'd have to use a different substrate than Game of Life because I don't think Game of Life would give you like a perfectly space filling curve. But that's a super cool idea and super cool to that would be cool to try out. Maybe it would turn. I haven't thought about this, but maybe it could turn out that the current objective is kind of the same objective as space filling. Because I mean, the only way to be super novel is to like do new and new things, right? And if you want to keep doing new things, you got to kind of fill the entire space. But I'm not 100% sure. That'd be very cool to try out. Yeah, I looked into this for a bit after we found these results, and I couldn't. Most of these they weren't there. I don't think I don't remember any of them being there, but I didn't look like too extensively into this community. Yeah. One thing I should mention also is these simulations, a lot of them are like flashing, as in I'm showing you like every other frame, and if I show you every frame, they're like flashing, as in they're all white or all black. It's like yeah, so that yeah, that's one thing. So maybe that's another reason that humans may not have discovered them because they're not really looking for flashing simulations, right? Okay, cool. So so we have these 260,000 simulations that we searched over with brute force search, right? We can take the final states of each of these simulations, embed them using clip, and now we have a giant set of 260,000 clip vectors in 512 space. We can again embed them into UMAP, right? We can just project them down into 2D and then plot the scatter curve. And here's the scatter curve. So we took each of the points and we colored them by the open-endedness score. So the darker points are more open-ended and the lighter points are less open-ended. And you can see there's actually a really cool structure that emerges. It seems that the vast majority of simulations lie on this main island, as in they all kind of look like each other. And there are small subsets of other simulations which look like other islands. There's one on the right where the flower was. There's like two islands at the bottom, and it turns out that all of the super open-ended simulations, like Conway's Game of Life, like this train simulation, and a bunch of other simulations, they all lie on where my mouse is over here. If you can see it, it's like this small little strip of super open-ended simulations. And there's some outliers, but that's where most of them are. So this the structure can only really be seen using clip, right? Any questions here? Okay, nice. So, okay, let's move on to so those were the three methods that we proposed. And the cool thing about using Clip is I think it also enables quantification of artificial life because I feel like a lot of the weakness of artificial life is in how it's hard to quantify. A lot of works don't really quantify it rigorously because it's hard. I mean, I want to know how to go about quantifying a lot of subjective things in artificial life simulations. But Clip, because it kind of captures this subjective notion of what we care about, it makes it possible to capture this. So one thing we did was we just took the simulation of the biological cell in Boyd's and the spiraling circle prompt for Boyd's, right? And we have these two separate simulations, which are these two separate neural networks for individual Boyd's. And we just linearly interpolated the parameters of that neural network in between each other, right? So we just linearly interpolated, and you can see that quite drastically, the intermediate simulations fall off a cliff and they're really not that interesting and they're just creating like non-interesting behavior, right? And this is a very cool subjective observation. It's like the space of interesting simulations is sparse. That's what we're trying to say. And this is a cool observation nonetheless, but can we quantify it? It turns out that if you just take the clip embedding, you can just take the distance between these two images in clip space, and it gives you a really nice way to quantify where exactly it falls off the cliff. And it turns out it's like within a 10% interpolation, it falls off a cliff in both directions. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think I was also surprised as how good it actually ended up working in practice. This is where using CMES and like a diverse population-based search really helps a lot. Because if you use like CMES with a noise of like 1e negative 4, then it basically becomes clear like gradient descent, right? And you don't have enough exploration, then you'll just, like you said, you won't sample anything besides this really bad initial point. And it's everything around you is also just as bad, so it doesn't really make sense where to go. That's why I think you really need CMES with like a larger population diversity, but even that may not be enough sometimes. So yeah, I was surprised it ended up working really well in practice. Oh, so for Boyd's, we just read random. There's nothing. We just it just found everything by itself. For Linear, we actually started off, we centered the search space at a solution found by the linear breeder paper. So we just centered the search space around that. So it was biased towards an existing known solution and it like built off of that. because I think the dynamics rule were super important to that, where it's like most dynamics rules don't really work well. You need to be around that local neighborhood that's already found and just make small changes to it that work well. Yeah, yeah, for linear, yeah, yeah, and in general, yeah, probably, yeah. Good point. Another thing we did was try to just like we just took particle life and we just saw like what does clip think happens um, when we just add more particles and more types of particles. So we can start off by looking at the right plot over here where we just like sweep the number of particles n and the number of types of particles from one, two, three, four up to six. And you can see that, and we optimize each of these different substrates. These are each different search spaces, right? Because like they have different properties and stuff. So for each of them, we try to search for a caterpillar, just like that prompt. And you can see caterpillars only really emerge when there's like basically 3,000 particles and like it seems four different types of particles, or I guess three different types of particles. So you need at least those that condition to get caterpillars, and you can quantify that using this heat map over here on the right. And you can also plot what happens as you increase the number of particles in just like a standard plot, and you can see that it shows again caterpillars only really emerge at 3,000 particles. That's when they really start to come about. And this quantifies this notion of more is different. It's like this seminal physics paper where they talk about how more if you have a complex system and you add more components to it, you can get qualitatively different types of emergent behaviors out. And more really is different in particle life, at least. Another experiment we did was we just took like one of the our caterpillar simulation and it had like 36 different parameters to search over, right? We just tried to sweep each of the parameters individually in order to gauge which one is the most important. Because in artificial life systems, you often want to, which of my 500 parameters is like the most important thing to the simulation? Does the rate of grass growing matter or does it not really matter? So we just took the parameter and we just swept it across a range of values and we just saw what happened to the end simulation. So you can see that perturbing the least important parameter, it doesn't really change anything in the behavior of the simulation. But sweeping the most important parameter, it completely destroys the caterpillar, right? And if you just measure the standard deviation of the clip vector change according to that prompt, the like standard deviation of the score change, I guess, the alignment score, it gives you a way to quantify what's an important parameter, what's not an important parameter. Yeah. And it turns out that the most important parameter that destroyed the caterpillar, it turned out to be the interaction strength between the green and the yellow particle, which makes sense, right? Because that's like the caterpillar is green and yellow. And then finally, the last thing we did was we just tried to measure simulation plateau in Linea. So we just took this simulation that we found and just took a step in Linea and the next step and just calculated how fast the latent space is changing. And it gave a pretty good indication of when the simulation had plateaued and when it's time to stop running it. Okay, cool. And to start wrapping up, I guess I think that the ASIL is like super cool because it's like agnostic to any specific substrate. It's not like overfit to linear or voids. So you can use it to search for your own simulation. So over here, what I did was I created my own simulation called Particle Life Plus Plus, which I think is really worth investigating. And basically what it is instead of particle life where you have fixed colors and like a fixed interaction rule which dictates it, the particles can change each other's colors. So a red particle and a green particle can come together and make a blue particle and a orange particle. And because the colors can change in this way, it kind of reminds you of like chemistry in the periodic table, where elements can come together and create a new element. And yeah, I feel like this is like the way to get a combinatorial explosion in complexity because there's just so much more things that are possible, right? Because that's if you can create a new element and that new element can interact in many different new ways with the previous elements, and you just end up with this combinatorial explosion of what's possible. So I searched for open-ended simulations in Particle Life Plus Plus. I didn't spend too much time on this, and I think if I spent more time, I can get the results to be much better. But nonetheless, you do see some very compelling results. Here's some more interesting results from Particle Life Plus Plus. You can see on the top middle over here, this is like my advisor's favorite, is that these particles like where the one second. Yeah, so these particles they come together, they explode in like a supernova, and the universe seems to be like dead and it's like stagnant, but then they coalesce back into these particles and they explode again. So it's like one way to be open-ended, I guess, right? Okay, that cool. So yeah, you can use your own substrates, and so another thing we did was we took this the of 16 different Boyd simulations that we found, via the illumination search, and we just let them run side by side, and then eventually we let them enter each other's worlds. So this is like basically allowing different universes of artificial life to interact with each other, just as a cool experiment to see what would happen. So if I go back a little bit, you can see that they form their own patterns. Like there's like the line, there's like the flocking behavior, there's like spiraling, and when we let them loose, it turns out this yellow one is kind of like an invasive species. It's going out and trying to mess with all the other species and mess with their dynamics in order to mess them up, right? And you can see a lot of the patterns of the other simulations, they get interrupted and it's no longer there. Like all this is just chaos. But if you look at the bottom left, the light green pattern, it's pretty robust to these perturbations. It's not really influenced whenever other people try to come and mess with it. So it's a really cool way to, I guess, just look at like multi-agent interactions and in Boyd's at least, right? Another thing we did was just do the same exact thing, but do it with cellular automata. So these are 16 different rules for a game of life that we found, and we just let them compete for territory. So a rule, I'm forgetting the exact details of how I set this up, but basically, if a cell is like dead, the cellular automata rule can claim that territory from some other one. So your goal is just to maximize your territorial claim, right? So if we run this, you can see that there's some simulations which die out instantly and don't really aren't that good at occupying territory, and there's other ones which are just expanding indefinitely and just occupying more and more territory and outcompeting everything else. And interestingly enough, there is one simulation. If you look at where my mouse is, this light green simulation, it's terrible at controlling territory, as in it immediately starts dying out. But it's very resilient, as it's impossible to completely kill off. If you see over here, there's always some remnants of it lying around, and it's just staying there indefinitely. So it's like this. It's like it's not good at conquering territory, but it's very resilient. Can you say that again? Oh, I see. Yeah, for this experiment, I remember there was like a lot of arbitrary decisions to be made in terms of that, and even some other more basic questions. And I don't remember the exact details, but I want to say that I just did one of like just choose a random person to occupy that territory, or I think I did the rules either. No, what I did was I applied each rule to each cell, and then chose one of them based on like where the nearest like cell is. Like it's kind of complicated to describe, so I won't get into it. But I'm also blanking on the exact details, but we can talk about it later if you want. Okay, cool. So I guess to wrap up, it's like what now, right? So the thing I've been thinking about a lot is like what's really stopping us from achieving this, right? So I painted this beautiful picture of our universe and our biological life on Earth, right? What's stopping us from achieving it? So I tried ASIL. I tried to get ASIL to like basically create a neural cellular automata, which basically did what happened on Earth, right? I just asked it like, can you create self-replicating molecules? and then create cells floating in primordial soup, and then predator-prey dynamics and the alien animals roaming around. Basically, that's kind of just what happened here, right? It's just the natural course of evolution. And you can see that it satisfied the objective. If I pause the video here, every frame of this kind of looks right. This kind of looks like self-replicating molecules. This kind of looks like cells. This kind of looks like predator and prey. You can see the two different types of animals here. And at the end, it does look like kind of aliens, animals roaming around. But obviously, we wouldn't say this is like a good simulation of what's going on, right? It kind of just looks like it's memorized a single trajectory for this prompt description. So eventually, I think this is like the direction we're headed down. But what's stopping us from achieving this, right? So I think the main thing is I think the expressivity of the substrates. I think with the substrates that we're working with, like voids, particle life, and etc., they're just too constrained. We need to come up with substrates that are more general and are capable of expressing more and more things. And in this way, neurocellular automata is really good because it's in some sense a very universal thing, right? But I feel like there's not enough structure baked into neurocellular automata to really get you maybe what you need. Because it depends. It's like a fine balance between baking in enough structure but not baking in too much structure to where it's not expressive enough. I'm really excited about the Particle Life Plus Plus simulation that we created because I do think that that sort of chemistry idea where you're like just have this combinatorial explosion in ways things can interact is a really powerful idea that can really take you long distance. So I'm working on that idea as well, and I'd encourage you guys to do the same. I think that's super cool. And the other thing is search algorithms. Like I said before, I don't think that these local search algorithms like gradient descent, maybe even CMES, or these super hill climbing algorithms are going to be enough. And so how do we get out of this, right? I think we need to embrace the chaoticness of the simulation. And basically what that means is that you need to embrace serendipity. I think that's going to be the only way to get out of it. So there's a lot of work from like, Ken Stanley on working on like serendipitous search algorithms, which embrace this idea. So yeah, I think you need to embrace that idea and not just do local hill climbing towards one objective, but just have multiple objective and just serendipitously transfer between them, something like map elites or something, right? And we did some preliminary experiments on map elites and it turned out to work really well, but we haven't really released that. And finally, the last thing you really need is scale. I mean, all the other stuff that we're doing, we saw like how important scale is for AI. Like the algorithms were there, but no one had scaled them up. So scale is like you really need scale to really see things to work in practice. And artificial life really just hasn't been scaled yet because there's not really that much like, practical applications to A life currently yet. And I hope there will be soon in the future, but that there not much money and resources have gone into artificial life. And once that happens, I think maybe we might see like big breakthroughs, just scaling up the number of particles, just scaling up the grid sizes, and maybe you might see more and more interesting things. But what you scale also matters. I still don't think we have like a specific thing that like you can point to like, oh, we want to scale this simulation up, right? So first, I guess as a field, we need to like create the GPT-1 of our field and show that it's like doing cool stuff, and then you can just scale it up indefinitely. And hopefully, the more you scale it, the more interesting behavior it produces, right? Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, you're right because that's the reason I kind of stuck to a lot of more of the grid-based stuff because it's much more computationally easy to simulate. But one, there are like a lot of optimizations you can do in particle simulations, which I didn't do, and I didn't do because there's just a lot of engineering work that you can do. So that would be super cool. But two, I do agree that like the thing about particles, the reason that I really want to scale them up is because they have so much interpretable structure to humans. Like in this neurocellular automata, you don't really know what's happening because it kind of just seems like it's like It's like it feels like it's way too overfit, and it seems like you're just doing a ComNet on images. The thing about particles, it's like there's like clear interpretable structure that makes it distinctively like an artificial life thing and not like a just an image generation thing, right? Maybe it's like a personal bias towards particles and like real stuff and physical things, but yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm leaning towards it. But yeah, I've been thinking about, I don't know if there is a fundamental distinction between scaling up grid-based stuff or particle-based stuff or some sort of other, maybe you can imagine like multi-agent stuff. But I don't really know what's the right answer. But if I had to put my money on it, I think the most intriguing and interesting results that we'd find is from particles. Oh, nice. Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, yeah, I'll be in touch then. What's your name? Okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah, that'd be very cool to check out. And the cool thing about particle life is it's only local interactions. You can just throw away the global interactions. Yeah. Oh, that's a super cool idea because I guess artificial life is one of those fields that really appeals to a general public just because it's like one aesthetic and just like really cool ideas, right? So if you just find a way to decentralize the compute to work across like millions of people, that would be amazing. Yeah. They're starting to do that with AI training now. So yeah. Yeah. Hmm. I see. Uh, Yeah, it depends on which experiments you're talking about. Because I remember the Boyds and Linear and the particle life simulations, they were super robust. I could try out like a population size of 8, 16, 32. It didn't really matter. What were the other ones I did? Yeah, for the CMES ones, they were pretty robust, I remember. Yeah, they're pretty robust. I can't remember any other specific hyperparameters I tried out that were super finicky to get working. The SGD results were pretty finicky because it's doing backprop through time, so there's a lot of tuning of like a certain backprop through time parameters, et cetera, because it's just like a very like kind of like not unstable, but like a very intricate algorithm. But CMES seemed to be pretty robust, and it's partly because the search space was kind of more well structured than I would have thought of otherwise. But the hard, okay, so one thing I should say is CMES, these results for particle life is a particle life plus plus in this example where the colors change is a very hard search space to search over. So if you guys want to give it a shot, that would be amazing. And I give the code for it in the GitHub. And that's why the results here, they're like pretty cool, but they're not like that intriguing because it's like small changes to the, it's like a small little neural network that controls the interactions. Small changes to this neural network completely change how two elements interact, and thus it changes how what can be created, and it changes what that thing can interact with, and it's like just this just giant thing to like very hard to search over. And I use CMES in this case, and it isn't producing results as good as I wanted it to. As in, more specifically, maybe more concrete, I think there are more open there. I think this simulation, this substrate, has very, very open-ended simulations that CMES is not finding. I should say it like that. So it's getting stuck in like these local minima in the simulation because of the chaos. So one thing we could do is just like, just scale up the CMES with bigger batch sizes, but I really think you need a different search algorithm eventually if you want more stability and just to get consistently good results. But yeah, I want to wrap up by just thanking my collaborators, Chris Liu, Louis Kirsch, Yujin Tang, Ken Stanley, Philip Isola, and David Ha. Thank you. Hmm. I in some sense, I think it requires a lot more investigation, so I can't say one way or the other. But if I had to put my money on it, I would not want to fine tune them because if you fine tune them and it becomes like a lot of there have been a lot of works in like Alife using like auto encoders as like the representation space, and I do think that it kind of your representations become overfit to that substrate because you don't want to overfit your representation to what's this specific Boyd simulation you care about. You wanted to have a general human notion of what humans care about. So I think a better solo strategy would just to be to like wait like 2 years and wait for a better foundation model to come out, and hopefully that works much better. It sounds like a naive thing to do, but I do think that in the long term, that's more aligned with what humans care about rather than overfitting to weird intricacies of your simulation. Mhm. Oh, you're talking about yeah, I saw the polymathic data set. It's basically like you're basically saying can we create better substrates inspired by those, right? Yeah, I think it would be super cool. I don't know if you could train on them to create a better substrate, but yeah, I think you could take inspiration from those ideas from like fluid dynamics and like these chaotic dynamical systems in order to create more and better substrates just to get inspiration from real physics. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Because I think the problem is like we just don't have good substrates. Like if I asked you like what should we scale, then we don't I don't know what the answer is, right? So we need to spend a lot of time and find the best substrate to search over, yeah, and scale. Any other questions? Wait, can you see the question again? I'm not sure if I followed the question. Mhm. Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, that seems like a pretty cool way to scale up like particle-based systems, I guess. But it loses a appeal of like having individual particles because I guess if you turn it into like a density field and like you evolve that, and maybe you're talking about just like an engineering effort, which I can't really talk about because it's not really my expertise. But intuitively, I mean, it feels like you're at a high level, at least you're losing like the thing that makes a particle. Like you can just look at it and be like, oh yeah, it's at this point in time. If it's more like a field that like radiates outward. Um, but yeah, yeah. I'm not too sure. Either way, it'd be just cool to see something get scaled up. Yeah, one of my collaborators, Ken Stanley, he said like a comment that I really resonated with. It's like no one's ever spent like $100 million on like an Alife project, right? Like what they have with like GPT and AI. It'd be cool to see like what would happen if someone did scale it up with like $100 million, scale something up with scale 100 million parameters. Maybe a lot of things would work, maybe nothing would work, and we need something more like a better algorithm or a better substrate. But yeah. What'd you say? Oh, like in time, right? Yeah, if you run this specific one, it's kind of overfit to this image, so it kind of just becomes if I remember right, it kind of just stays on this image for a bit and then it kind of just does something random. It's just like I think it decays into like nonsense. And if you train it over a long horizon where it's like you train it over instead of 256 time steps, you train it for like in like a range of like from 0 to like 10,000 time step, that will fix the issue. It'll make it much more stable. But I just didn't do that because it's one, it's expensive, and two, yeah, that wasn't really the point of this project. It stays there for a little bit longer, but then it decays into some nonsense, if I remember correctly, for this specific one. Because this one is really overfit to this specific sequence of images. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool question because I actually had some slides at the end of this presentation, but I took them out because I didn't think it was that applicable here. But basically, it would be super cool to search over like much more diverse settings than like just artificial life settings. Like you can imagine instead of searching over just 2D artificial life settings or even 3D artificial life settings, what if you just searched over like some weird exotic physics rules for like arbitrary dimensions? Like I'm not sure if you've seen like Stephen Wolfram's work with like the Wolfram Physics Project, but basically he wants to like find some super fundamental small local physics rules which that if you run it in like arbitrary graphs which can be like in arbitrary numbers of dimensions, they emerge like they should emerge the 3D structure of space-time, special relativity, the laws of physics, and everything that we know and love just from this weird graph update rule. So in the same way, I think you could search over, hopefully, maybe eventually in the future, we could search over like, 3D, 4D worlds, or even more exotic stuff that's like not even like 3D. It's like something more fundamental, just like graphs update rules or something. Okay, sweet. Thank you guys. Yeah, I really wish I could have made it in person because it seems super fun, but I'm hoping you guys are having a lot of fun.